Live from the Slightly Twisted Deck Bar, it's the Poojie Podcast with Justin Lemie.
The Poojie Podcast is proudly sponsored by Cimarron Golf Club, located in Jacksonville, Florida, off County Road 210, just west of St. John's Parkway.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Poojie Podcast. Hope everyone out there watching has enjoyed their Mother's Day weekend, did something special for the mom in their life. I know I did. Enjoyed getting my mom a Poojie Podcast koozie, as well as some flowers and a card, of course. So it was a nice weekend here in Mandarin at the Slightly Twisted Deck Bar. Hope everyone else enjoyed theirs as well. But today I do want to dive into the 2020 schedule that got released last week on Thursday. Now, obviously, fans in the NFL have their own perceptions of NFL teams across the country, but the schedule is a very good way for the NFL to kind of tell fans what they think of specific teams. So just some basics real quick. Obviously, the Jaguars do get one primetime game on a Thursday night, and their only 4 o'clock game is on the West Coast this year. So other than that, 1 o'clock games, pretty basic schedule for us, but we will jump into some of the matchups and break it down a little bit. So without further ado, Luke, if you want to jump in with me real quick and kind of take me through the first quarter of the season, if you could.
Yeah, totally. So it is Mother's Day weekend, and also Cinco de Mayo was this week. Kind of a good week for everything. Week 1, we're hosting the Colts at home. The Colts are expected to win this division. It's going to be a tough matchup, especially with the new acquisition of Phillip Rivers. In recent history, Phillip Rivers has been terrible against the Jaguars, just destroying us every way, minus in 2017 where we won at home. I think the Colts have a really solid team, and that's going to be a big test for the Jaguars. I think for us to win, we have to score at least 24 points. That's my prediction on that game. Going to week 2, we are going to Nashville, Music City, playing the Titans, the most hated rival we have. Unless our run defense gets a lot better, which I'm hoping some of our draft picks help us with that. Kayvon Thielen helping out in the run defense, maybe. If not, it's going to be a rough going up in Nashville. But I think if we can stop Derrick Henry, we can stop the Titans. Hoping for a win in that one. And
yeah,
then,
I think, Luke, let me stop you there for a second. I think starting off the season real quick with 2 divisional games is obviously a daunting task, but I think it's going to say a lot about the direction of this team moving forward into the season. So like you mentioned with Derrick Henry and also with Phillip Rivers, 2 proven players over the last half decade, 10 years for Phillip Rivers, of course. And like you mentioned, Phillip Rivers has had our number in Jacksonville, so now we get to play against him twice a season. So will be interesting to open up with 2 divisional opponents, but take us through that week 3 matchup against the Dolphins.
Yeah, week 3 is exciting. Thursday night football down in Duval. A little Florida matchup between Tua and Gardner Minshew. Got to see what the rookie quarterback out of Miami is going to be coming out with. Hopefully our Jacksonville defense can go and pressure him, get some sacks, make him make some costly mistakes and throw the ball away. I think we're going to win that game. The Dolphins and us, I think we are further along than the Dolphins currently are, and I just think that we'll have their number on Thursday night in Jacksonville. And then, of course, going after that game, we go to Cincinnati, in Cincinnati, against another rookie quarterback, Joe Burrow. I expect him to be playing week 1, and I think he'll still be playing in week 4. Last year, we went to Cincinnati, and we somehow won that game. I think, again, we're going to win that game because they haven't added too many pieces, unless Joe Burrow comes out slinging. But I think in his freshman rookie year, he's going to struggle a little bit. So hopefully coming out of the first quarter, we are 3-1. 2-2 is something reasonable, and if we're 1-3, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, 3-1 would definitely be wishful thinking there, but it is a pretty decent matchup. Obviously, 2 familiar opponents with the Colts and Titans. And then the week 3 Thursday night game actually was Gardner Minshew's first victory last year in the same week of the season. So it'll be interesting to see if he can perform at the same level. Obviously, a difficult matchup. Miami has done a lot this offseason to kind of bolster that defense, obviously getting Byron Jones from the Cowboys. But it will be interesting to see what the Dolphins do with Tua, if the plan is going to be to play him day one or if they will let him sit behind a veteran, unlike Joe Burrow, who we're automatically assuming he will start day one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there between those two quarterbacks in those two situations. But I would assume 3-1 is probably at the best case scenario. 1-3, like you said, unacceptable. If we can get out of the first quarter 2-2, I'd be pleasantly surprised with that as well. So let's go into the second quarter of the season. We do have Sam coming in to tell us about these next 4 games. So Sam, take it away.
Hey, yeah, you say wishful thinking 3-1 for the first 4 games, but we are playing that week the Dolphins team and that week Bengals team, and I think we gotta win one of those divisional games. So 3-1 is definitely the goal. But moving into the second quarter of the season, we start out away at the Texans, going across the pond. I think these games against the Texans are going to be the most winnable games in this conference. So I think we match up well against the Texans, especially Gardner Minshew. So the first game we played against Gardner Minshew last season, I thought he did a really good job. We almost won that game, and it was pretty much the coaching staff that took the ball out of Minshew's hands. He was wanting to win that game. Second game of that year that we played the Texans, he definitely struggled. So I think he's going to want to come back, really stick it to him that game. But other than that, we're moving on to the Lions at home. If we don't win this game, it's pretty sad for the season. I think beating the Texans and then beating the Lions right after would be real good for our hopes and the team's morale moving through the season. Winnable Lions game. Nothing on that team really stands out. They don't have a run game that can really destroy us, and their passing attack is anemic. Matt Stafford's getting older every day. So
yeah, and I will say it's interesting you bring that up about the Texans, because I think they've been one of the toughest nuts to crack for the Jaguars within the division. We do match up well against the Texans, and that game in Houston last year was Gardner Minshew's first start, losing that game 13-12 on a missed 2-point conversion by Leonard Fournette there at the end. But like you said, you'd like to think that the coaching staff is going to allow Minshew to kind of keep the playbook open and really kind of finish some of these games. We've gone through 6 games so far. You look at the Dolphins, you look at the Bengals, you look at the Lions. If we can win 2 of those 3 and then 1 of the divisional matchups, hopefully we can be 3-3 at worst going into the bye. 4-2 would be a solid number as well, and that would be, of course, winning all 3 of those winnable matchups there. But like you said, the Lions, just a very bland game. Not much is going to be exciting about that game going into it unless the team is already 3-2 or 4-1. So there has to be excitement already from the season for that game to matter. But that takes us to the bye week, and then we look at week 8 against the Chargers. Take us through that.
Right, and you mentioned that Lions team, and that kind of reminds me of that Lions game we played maybe a couple of years ago. Might have been Doug Marrone, one of his first games as a head coach for the Jags, and I think he really stuck it to him that game, if I remember correctly. I don't know if any of you guys remember that, but I think he played really well against him. So that would be kind of exciting to see if we can really punch him in the mouth, one of those kind of games. That would be sweet. Chargers is definitely my most exciting game I'm talking about today. Big reason why, Gus Bradley. I know how many Jags fans out there are ready to win against this guy, and I think Minshew knows that the fans want to beat this guy's defense. He's still a defensive coordinator for the Chargers. And it'd be really exciting for Minshew to kind of surgically pick apart that defense and bring us to win. It's a difficult team. They did pick up Justin Herbert. He should definitely be starting by this time. And we'll see how we can do in the run game. Not really sure who they picked up as a running back, but I know Melvin Gordon's out of there. So they just got Austin Eckler we got to deal with, which we have had struggles with in the past. Next game, we got the Texans. This time we got them at home at the Jags. Another good battle. I think it's likely we split these games with the Texans. There's going to be some stuff that either we fix or that the Texans fix following that first game. So it'd be exciting though if we can put the foot on the gas and kind of beat them twice. I think that would be by then. I think we'd be that'd show really positive hopes for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up some interesting facts there about the Texans, like we mentioned. Tough puzzle for us to figure out, but we do play them twice within 5 weeks there in the middle of the season. And you mentioned going across the pond. For us this year, going across the pond is going to be going across the Gulf of Mexico. to Houston in Week 5. And then obviously that home game in Jacksonville against Houston was the game that was in London last year that Gardner Minshew pretty much had a audition for the starting job. The next week was going to be when Nick Foles was coming back. So I think there was a little bit of added pressure there last year when he played against Houston. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles it this year, almost knowing he has the reins to this football team. So we'll see what they can do. But moving on after that 8th game, Week 9, we'll move into Week 10 to start the second half of the season with a tough matchup, I would presume, at Green Bay. So Jacob, jump in here and tell me about Green Bay.
Yeah, this is definitely the part of the schedule where I feel like it's real heavy with some good teams, so this is going to be a rough stretch. But we go up to the frozen tundra, Lambeau Field, for the first time since 2012. This is our 3rd trip there. We've only ever won once, but Nate Hackett, former Jags OC, is now the coordinator there, and he's got some good weapons. He's got Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones. So there's a lot of offensive firepower that our defense, our newly made defense, will have to try to take care of. And they were no slouch on defense themselves. Apparently, I had no idea they had 2 double-digit sackers in Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. So it's going to be a tough game overall in Lambeau. Then we go into Week 11. We play the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like Luke said, the Titans are probably the most hated, but for a non-divisional opponent, Pittsburgh Steelers are a pretty big rival for us, especially with that 2017, that great 2017 we had. We lost our last matchup to them, but they get Big Ben coming back, and they honestly were like a pretty good team last year. I think they went 8-8. So even without Big Ben, they still perform really well. They have Juju, they have James Conner, Vance McDonald. So this is going to be 2 straight weeks of tough opponents who are playoff caliber teams.
Yeah, when I looked at this schedule and saw Green Bay Week 10 and Pittsburgh Week 11, I wasn't too thrilled simply because that's right when the Packers seem to start showing up on the field and start to dominate, get a little rust off from the offseason and really start to put some pressure on the rest of the league. And then Pittsburgh, I think this is going to be a time when we really find out who Pittsburgh is by Week 11. If this matchup was Week 3 or Week 4, I think Pittsburgh could still be figuring some things out. But by Week 11, you would think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are either going to be a playoff contender or a team that's in the cellar. So it'll be interesting to see how we handle that. And like you mentioned, an old divisional rival of ours from the AFC Central. So it's always exciting to play the Steelers. They've always been a big rival of ours, like you mentioned up there with the Titans. And we always play the Steelers pretty tough. So it'll be cool to see that, the first game of back-to-back home games, see what the Jaguars can do. We should know kind of where our season is heading by this point of the season, but takes us into that second game of the back-to-back home games against the Cleveland Browns. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so just as you said, we stay at home against the Browns, and it's another AFC North opponent. This one's a little easier, but still very dangerous. They went 6-10 last year, but they have a lot of firepower. They got Odell, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt still, David Njoku. They just signed Austin Hooper this offseason, drafted Harrison Bryant. So they are all in on the offense. And Baker, he might have struggled some last year. We weren't sure what Baker we're going to see. If he progresses well and like turns it around, we might be in trouble on defense, but hopefully not. And then their defense as well. Myles Garrett, they have some big guys on defense. So this is another tough matchup. Good thing it's in home. Minnesota is Week 13 in Minnesota. So it's late in the season. Not going to be worried about snow coat because they're indoors. But this is another really good team. Offensively, they were one of the top passing teams. They did lose Stephon Diggs, but they still have Adam Thielen. They just drafted Justin Jefferson. So hopefully he's not as good as Stephon Diggs his first year, but we might have to deal with someone, a first-round wide receiver. Their running back group is really good. They have Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison, and Mike Boone. So whether Cook can stay healthy or not by then, they still have Madison. So that's scary. And they always have a really good defense. They seem pretty consistent year to year. So this is rounding out a 4-week stretch of pretty tough defenses, I think. So Minshew's definitely going to have to hopefully turn it on by this time and lead the Jags to – I'm going to set a goal of 2-2. I think it'd be kind of outrageous to assume we would go like 3-1 or 4-0. 2-2 would be good. Hopefully not less, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. 2-2 through this stretch would be pretty solid for a young team like the Jaguars. And if you look at any 4 games on the schedule as far as weeks 1 through 4, 5 through 9, 10 through 13, and so on, you'd have to pinpoint these 4 games as the toughest on the schedule, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, because by this point in the season, you would hope that the Jaguars could maybe have been putting some stuff together on the field, so maybe they can handle their business here, maybe show up and shock some people. I do think that Browns game is going to be a sneaky competitive game between 2 teams that I think are on a vengeance tour, looking to shock some people in the NFL world. I know the Browns were obviously a letdown last year after a lot of hype, but they do have so much talent. And then going to Minnesota, I think Minnesota is one of the few teams the Jaguars have actually only beaten 1 time. So going to Minnesota is going to be a difficult game too. Fun fact, I think that 1 win against Minnesota came at Minnesota about 8 years ago. Cecil Shorts, I think, called a Hail Mary pass to win the game towards the end of the game. Some crazy ending. So it was a lot of fun to watch that game in Minnesota. But that does take us to the final 4 games, which I'll run through real quick. As we already mentioned, the Titans, this time we do get them at home. I think the key here is going to be kind of playing into their slow game. Obviously, we saw what the Titans did last year, making it to the AFC Championship game. But the Jaguars handled them last year in Jacksonville, so let's hope we can keep that up. But I do think we need to play, match them on their running game and make sure that we kind of control the pace of the game. So that'll be interesting to watch at home. And then one of the toughest matchups, if not the toughest matchup, at Baltimore in Week 15. And you'd have to assume by this point Baltimore is going to be fighting for the divisional title at this point. If they haven't already secured it, they're going to be fighting for a 1 or 2 seed in the playoffs. So this Baltimore team is obviously a projected top seed in the AFC. Always tough to go on the road, even in December, or I guess especially in December. So the Ravens kind of have a running attack much like the Titans as far as the ground and pound style, but then they have that element with Lamar Jackson kind of adds a different dynamic to their game. Then we come back home for the last home game of the season, barring any playoff games, which we would hope could happen. But our last home game, December 27th at home against the Bears. So funny thing about this game, I think this is a very winnable game, which might be to the demise of a lot of Jaguar fans. Depending on how the season goes, I could see this game, if we win this, kind of being detrimental to our draft position. So it'll be interesting to see how the fans kind of respond to that. But I do think this is a very winnable game. Bears might not be playing for too much at this point in the season, but it will be Nick Foles' homecoming. So we'll see if he's starting by this point. So that'll be interesting to see him come back to Jacksonville. And then we round off the season at the Colts. Again, another divisional opponent. At this point, the Colts, Titans, and Texans, we would assume, are going to be battling it out for the AFC South. Let's hope that the Jaguars can be in that mix too. But I do like the way that the schedule plays out. I do like how we only have back-to-back away games once on the schedule. But that also does mean we only have 2 back-to-back home games on the schedule. So I do like the way it plays out. Not too many difficult weather games as far as snow would go indoors in Minnesota. So any thoughts from you guys on how the schedule lays out, I guess, throughout the whole 17 weeks?
I really like how our first 4 games, we start off with a tough one against the Colts, and that's going to be a real tough challenge. If we win that game, we have 3 winnable games right after that. I think the first 4 games is going to be a nice learning curve or smoothing curve to get any kinks out of from the off season, any rust off, and really get our groove going in those, especially those games against the Dolphins and the Bengals, to really fix what we need to fix and then go into the next part of the season.
Yeah, I think something interesting is a lot of these games, the storyline is not going to be anything around the Jaguars. If anything, it's going to be around Gardner Minshew a little bit. But we already know going into that Colts game, it's going to be about Phillip Rivers. We already know going into that Titans game, it's going to be about the AFC Championship run. You know, the Dolphins with Tua, the Bengals with Burrow. So we saw in 2017 when the Jaguars made a run, they kind of came from behind and they were a sneaky under-the-radar team. I'm curious if we're going to see something similar to that, maybe not to the extent of a AFC Championship run, but as far as just kind of winning 1 or 2 games here and there, and then at the end of the season looking back and, whoa, that's 9 wins or that's 10 wins, and just games that people were too focused on other storylines.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure back in 2017 when we went on that run the year before, we only had 4-3 wins, if I remember correctly. So you never know when a team can come out. I mean, we hope for so much, but it has to be somewhat realistic, our expectations. But like Luke said, those are winnable games. And what I feel excited about this year is if Minshew progresses, we have a quarterback that when we play those winnable games, I feel comfortable that we will win those winnable games. In the past, as Jags fans, we kind of think, oh, we should beat that team. Turns out we ended up not doing it. And I think it really opens up a stretch in the beginning to gain some ground, get on a little streak, hopefully, that by the time we get into the later half where it's pretty tough, we're on a little bit more of a momentum that's taking us into that late December schedule.
Yeah, Jacob. Feeding off what you're saying with Minshew, I think a lot of Jags fans kind of feel that energy that he brings toward the end of the game. And if we can feel it as fans, that teammates can really feel it on the field, like that they can actually win the game, and then that he does win those games. And when the coaching staff kind of, plays around a little bit and takes it out of his hands, and then the game it's really interesting to watch how he's going to be this year, and he's going to be the big storyline for the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 2020 season.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned there about winning the winnable games, Jacob, and then what you said, Sam, about, teammates rallying behind Gardner Minshew. I think he has a personality about him that kind of, a nice locker room presence, as cliche as that may sound. But I think as excited as the fans get in the stands or watching on TV, you'd have to think that energy translates tenfold to the rest of the team. And
right.
we mentioned a few episodes ago about the game that the Jags won in Denver and the game that the Jags won in Cincinnati. And those were games that bad teams would find ways to lose. And don't get me wrong, we were a bad team, but we found ways to win. So those types of wins lead me to believe, an extra year of the offseason, an extra year under his belt, you enter these games and you go into that Dolphins game, you go into that Bengals game, and then even the Lions game. I don't want to say those are must wins. I mean, I would say they are must wins actually, but I would say I'm confident, like Jacob said, going into those games that we can win those, not, oh, we should win those, but we will win those. So those first 6 games are very favorable for us. 4 of the first 6 games are against teams with losing records from 2019. So obviously a lot happens in the offseason. But then what are your opinions, I guess, in that quarter 3 of the season? Packers, Steelers, Browns, Vikings, Titans, Ravens. I mean, you look there, that is almost the exact opposite as far as 6 or 7 games go, where you're running the gauntlet there trying to end the season and just survive. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So first half of the season, you can kind of see if we can win the winnable games. Next half, let's see if we can win the games no one thinks we're going to win. The game against the Steelers, the game against the Ravens. I think when you're talking about the Ravens, that game kind of gets me excited. Kind of a trap game for them. It'll be a big media game. If we're winning games, then they're going to say, wow, this game against the Ravens, we didn't even think that it was going to be kind of a battle for the Ravens. But I think we match up well. If we can get our run game issues fixed, then we're definitely going to be matched up well against that team. Absolutely, especially with our fast linebackers. Yeah, I can see us handling Lamar Jackson well, especially in that time of season.
Yeah, and I know we're sitting here kind of looking at the season as a whole, but I think when it comes down to a player's point of view, you really have to look at this in chunks of the season and not get too ahead of yourself. And by the time we get past that second Texans game, if we can be sitting at, let's say, 5-3, at worst, maybe 4-4, 5-3, even 6-2, if we can somehow find ourselves in that position, that's a lot of momentum going into Green Bay. And that's a game that 7 weeks ago, Green Bay was circling as a guaranteed win. Well, now a lot of these teams later in the season are looking at, oh, wow, this team's coming in here ready to win, and they're finding ways to win. So I think just kind of piling on those wins throughout the beginning of the season helps the success later in the season, just taking teams off guard. And, teams aren't prepared for teams like the Bengals or the Lions or the Jaguars to maybe be winning 5 or 6 games in the first half. If we can do that, I think we could really surprise some people later on in the season.
Yeah, a lot of those first games in the first half of the season, If we win, it's nice. I mean, it's nice to have a win under your belt and everything. It doesn't really tell you who you are as a team yet, though, because a lot of those you should win those games. The Lions are bad, Dolphins are bad, the Bengals are bad. These are all people that picked in front of us, so they should be bad teams and we should win. But if you go into the next half of the season where you're playing Green Bay, Baltimore, the Steelers, these are all teams where if you beat them, you can say, all right, we're a playoff caliber team. And that's when you can really tell what kind of team Jacksonville will be.
Yeah, another thing I like about this schedule, not only the fact that it is loaded pretty heavily on the back end, but we can maybe get some talent or put some talent together and win some of those games. I guess from a fan's point of view, it's kind of nice. We have 4 home games in our last 7 games. So 4 of our last 7 are at home, and then 5 of our last 9 are at home as well. So if the team can find some success early, whether it's on the road or at home, there could be some exciting games in Jacksonville to finish up the season. And then second, I guess the second part to that would be with 3 home games in the first 8 games or first 7 games, one of those games is at night. So the fans going to the games really only have to worry about 2 1 p.m. games before November, which is kind of nice from a fan's point of view, not having to worry about showing up in the blistering heat, which we obviously all know too well. You get a lot of those later games in the season at home rather than early in the season. So just a nice little note there about how the schedule sets up.
Yeah, another quick point that I literally just thought of while you were speaking, in terms of our home and away, it's good that I only think we only have 2 road games in a row at any given time. But I don't know if we're, not even considering the fact there's no London game. They canceled that due to the pandemic going on in this world right now. And I think it was at some point last year, people were saying the London teams coming back, they had a bye week, but that first game that they played back after London, they were all 0-8. So if that has an effect on those teams coming back, who knows if it's just coincidence or not. But that might be something we're looking at that is under the radar of that might help us not having to go to London and then come back.
Yeah, because while that is a home game for us, at least declared by the NFL, anytime you're traveling overseas, you're not really too close to home. So it is a home game for us, but it's obviously a lot of travel, which isn't ideal for any NFL team. But what is interesting is that bye week in week 7, 2 things. I'd be curious to know what the NFL's plans were originally for the Jaguar London games, because obviously week 8 was planned to be a London game, and now that's an away game for us. So it's obvious that the NFL shuffled around a little bit of the schedule. But number 2, the bye week is in week 7. I like that, the week right before we go out west. So maybe that's a situation where the team can get there early, maybe get acclimated. They don't necessarily need to worry about getting out there on 1 week's rest. They can get out there and maybe get acclimated to the time change, because we know as Jaguar fans, we have not had a lot of success on the West Coast. And West Coast, it's been an epic failure for us for quite some time out there. I mean, I remember a game a few years ago, we lost to the Cardinals, led by Blaine Gabbert, and that wasn't even in California. That was simply Arizona. So we struggle out there, but we'll see how it plays out. Anything else from anyone before we cut this off and I guess look forward to more Jaguar content in the future?
I got 2 things before we go. I'd like to go through and just see what we all think, an actual win-loss on the games we all went through. And then also, Justin, I know you're not a big NBA guy. Jacob, you are a decently big NBA guy. But this year is the first year we're having a Christmas football game. So that's pretty exciting. I know Justin will actually be able to watch sports on Christmas now.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. But I will say, without a doubt, Christmas NBA basketball is actually enjoyable to watch because it's on throughout the day, and it's the one day I can really step back and commit to watching NBA basketball and not really have to worry about it. So I do like that, but I do like the football. You mentioned I think it's the Saints-Vikings.
Yeah.
But what a nice Christmas gift for the Saints getting to play on Christmas after everything the NFL has done to keep them out of postseason contention late in the postseason. But what was the other thing that you had just mentioned just before the NBA?
Yeah, just going over the games that we all talked about, just saying a realistic win-loss for each of those games. So I had the first 4. I think we're losing to the Colts. I'm going to say we're going to lose to the Titans because it's away, and then a win against the Dolphins at home and a win against the Bengals in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 2-2 through the first 4, and then Sam, what about you on the next 4? Texans, home against Lions, at Chargers, home against Texans.
Yeah, I think we win that first game against the Texans. We better win that game against the Lions. And obviously, game against the Chargers, we'd all like to win that one, but issues on the West Coast, it's far away. And then I think we're going to lose again the next game, the home game against the Texans. It just looks like a loss for us.
Yeah, if we can split those games against the Texans and go 1-1 there in that stretch, and then if we can beat the Lions and, if we beat the Chargers, great, but realistically a loss there. So that's 2-2 through those games. So 4-4 overall heading into the second half of the season. Jacob, realistic thoughts there starting week 10?
Yeah, so the Green Bay, I'm just going to go ahead and say I predict a loss. I hope for a win, but that's going to be a tough game. Pittsburgh in Jacksonville, I think with our rivalry against them, I think we figure out a way to win that at home. And then we go into the Browns and play them at home. And I want to say, I think if we do win 2 games in that stretch, it's going to be those 2 at home. And then going to Minnesota is another tough game against a quality opponent. So I'm going to say about 2-2 there, which I think would leave us at 7-5 after all those games.
So you feel 7-5 on your end, but as a whole right now, we have us at 6-6, splitting
6-6.
Splitting all 4 games in each quarter so far. But I agree with you. Steelers and Browns are going to be the most realistic wins there, I think, just because they're at home. Mm-hmm. I do think at Green Bay and at Minnesota are going to be very difficult, especially because by week 13, Minnesota could be fighting for the NFC North title and for some playoff positioning. So I have the last 4 games. I do feel like if we are going to beat the Titans, it would be at home, especially in December. I would like to see us win that. So I'll give us a win there. Baltimore, I'm chalking that up as a loss, much like the Packers game. It's just, I think there's just way too much talent there. And at the end of the day, these teams that pick at the end of the draft, there's a reason they're picking at the end of the draft. Like, they are the better team. And I think some of that talent's just too much to overcome sometimes. Then we have the Bears at home. I say we win that. So that's 2 wins in that stretch. And then the Colts is a toss-up. I'd like to think that we could beat the Colts and split with them at some point. But realistically, at Indianapolis, they'll be fighting for a playoff spot there as well against the AFC South. You'd have to think that they're going to come out firing there. And Phillip Rivers knows how to play that late in the season to get into the playoffs. So I'll say 2-2 there, which puts us at 8-8 overall from what we've said. If you look at the schedule game by game, 8-8 seems a little bit of wishful thinking. But I do think a lot of it kind of hinges on the early success the team has. If they can find a way to win 4 of those first 6 games and maybe get some momentum, I could see a way that they could maybe get to 8-8. And who knows, with the extra spot in the playoffs, 8-8, maybe 9-7 could be enough to get them into the playoffs as a wild card. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. What are your thoughts?
Well, Minshew went 6-6 last year, so I don't see 8. I would have guessed 8-8. If you had told me just to guess the season right on the spot. So I think anything less than that is a lost season for him. Anything more, something you can build off of. So it's going to be an exciting season, that's for sure. I know I'm excited.
Yeah, I definitely think with the talent that we have, I think a lot of us are thinking of Jags of the past where we have these expectations and they somehow manage to hit below them. But Minshew showed us that he seems to get our team meeting expectations, if not overcoming them, and actually winning those games. So I'm going to say 8-8's not too crazy. I think it is on the national stage. Most people are saying we're tanking for Trevor, but we have the talent to do it. And hopefully Minshew progresses as the leader to take us to a next level.
Yeah, I like 8-8 too. Maybe 9-7. There could be a swing game. Maybe the Vikings. Because sometimes the Vikings come out hot, and sometimes they come out and Kirk Cousins does Kirk Cousins, and he's not performing too well. So there might be a game there that we can steal and be 9-7.
Yeah, that Vikings game, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very up in the air game. Like you said, the Vikings kind of have 2 personalities sometimes. And if the Jaguars defense can come together, that could be a tough game for them. I do think obviously having those rookies coming in from the draft, it's going to be an opportunity for them to get a lot of playing time. And if they can really put some good talent on the field early, leading into the second half of the season, some of those younger players can start to develop before they play, Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson. So we'll have a good test, obviously, in the second half of the season. But I think overall, it should be an enjoyable season. I don't see a situation where many of these games are getting out of hand like we saw mid-season last year, a lot of 20, 30-point losses. I think the team maybe has it more together this year as far as consistency goes, I would like to think. But a lot of young players on the team, so we'll see what happens. But thanks for joining me, guys, and thanks to everyone who listened. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts, your predictions. Leave them in the comments. Make sure to share the video, and be sure to reach out if you're interested in one of the Black and Teal Poojie Podcast koozies. They are only $5, and I do ship them for free. So anyone out there watching, listening, please feel free to reach out and support the podcast and the hometown Jaguars with the Black and Teal koozie. So thanks for joining us, and go Jags.
Go Jags.
Be sure to follow our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other podcast streaming services, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel to check out unique video elements for each interview.